Now let's think a little bit more closely about gender and journalism. Now, if we want to think about how gender affects journalism, we want to acknowledge that journalism is a relatively privileged, I guess, form of media production. It's good, it's useful to look at women journalists because they are doing work which is widely acknowledged as being highly socially valuable. And there have been recent work in the area of journalism that suggests two things. One of the great ironies of today's media world is we probably live in an age where journalism is viewed with more skepticism than it ever has before. And because of that, it's actually become significantly more important than it arguably has been before. So we're all familiar with concerns about fake news and the rise of celebrity news and all of the and sensationalism and all of these sorts of things. And what Simon Cottle, Richard Sambrook, and Nick Mosdell have done in their recent work on journalism is they've valuably drawn our attention back to the fact that journalism for many people in many parts of the world is a real vocational calling that serves a really important social function and comes at quite a price. So, journalism has become incredibly dangerous thanks to two things. Thanks to the multiplication, the proliferation of global armed conflicts, down to the fact that those armed conflicts are so dangerous that Western, in particular, media industries are wary about sending their personnel to report on those conflicts. And therefore, the very dangerous work of reporting on the ground in global conflicts is falling increasingly to local journalists who are operating under extreme pressures of finance and flat out danger. I think this book makes the case that the casualty rates amongst journalists, the number of journalists killed in the line of duty, has proliferated exponentially in the last 20 years or so. And one of the curious byproducts of this is this attrition rate. This fact that journalism has become more dangerous has actually made the presence of women journalists more frequent in parts of the world that where previously women journalists were not encountered. And one of the places this has happened is in Iraq. So this is the image of Atwar Bajat, who is an Iraqi female journalist who was murdered in the line of duty. She was reporting on the Iraq conflict in 2006 and was assassinated. Basically, she was a target because she was a very high profile, very talented Iraqi journalist who was a challenge to the political powers that be, that really investigated in a fearless way the complexities of the Iraq conflict and its various alliances and participations, and was murdered because of it. And this actually reflects a broader truth. There has been some very compelling research done on Iraqi female journalists that suggests that one of the odd things that happened after the launch of the Second Iraq War in 2003 is that suddenly Iraq became the Iraqi journalism news industry became accepting of female journalists in the way that it hadn't been before. Now, this wasn't because that industry suddenly became more enlightened. It was because there were a range of other things that were happening. Kidnappings, and internet executions meant that Western news companies were less willing to send their reporters into the line of duty. There was Women were on the economic front line in Iraq more than they had been in the past. So, with the war casualties and the attrition of men of fighting age, we had more women who were doing two things, who were having to raise families by themselves, but were also the labor force for Iraqi industries. And one of those industries was journalism. So journalism became one of the things that women could do to feed their families. But the interesting thing is that this rise of new female journalists, and there's some research done on this, suggests that this influx of new generations of female journalists in Iraq had to do journalism in a very, very different way because of the dangers that women faced. So female journalists, they want to stay alive because being alive is a good thing, but also they are their family breadwinners. And this really changed how they went around doing journalism. So we know of the celebrity journalist. We know that in most cases, journalists really want to be known for the work that they do. We can all think of star reporters whose persona is very important to their work. So Emma Alberici would be an example of that. And Emma Alberici's personality and persona was very much at the forefront of that particular conflict. Now, Iraqi female journalists actually set out to do their work in a different way, whereby they were just as determined to tell compelling, interesting, truthful news stories, except they didn't want the credit for it. They didn't want to be known as the authors of the authors of particularly telling political critiques of things that were happening in Iraq. Why is that? Well, Atwar Bajat, because they didn't want to be targeted for doing it. And female journalists in particular were the subject of deliberate assassination attempts for the stories that they told. So what we begin to see is that the Iraqi news journalism industry begins to embrace female journalists for a set of structural economic issues. But the fact that work is being done by women who are in a particular position in Iraqi society affects the way that they go about their work, particularly with regard to deflecting their stories away from themselves. So what we begin to see are different practices of journalism which reflect the changing historical and economic and political realities of gender in the Iraqi society and in the Iraqi news industry. And so we begin to see how we can legitimately talk about how something like gender has a significant, explicable impact on the practice of a particular media form, in this case, journalism. And this provides us with a bridge to go forward and think about, well, why then would we choose a case study like Kate Adie to kind of filter industry-wide changes through the story of a particular person? And we'll pick up on that in the next video.